Okay, everybody. So, welcome back to my channel. You're on the Radical Moderate. I decided to stop in and talk for a little bit about some issues, things that bother me about what's going on in American society. So, I'm somebody who is someone who follows the news quite a bit. There's at least there's at least one news channel, or at least one newscast that I hear every day, and it's at least one. So there might be days where I consume a lot of news, but then there are days where I might not consume as much. Usually every day I listen to a newscast by ABC called Start Here. It's always in the mornings. They do three stories a day, plus a fourth, happy-go-lucky little story or something at the very end. um, but I wanted to talk about some problems that we have in America, and I want to beg people to reconsider some things. Number one, Americans are overwhelmingly opinionated. This is something that is not 100% a new phenomenon, but the point that it's got to has gotten really bad. And it's become a thing that, to be honest, I notice it's really bad amongst boomers, so no offense to boomers, but they're very opinionated. They've been there, they've done that, and I understand it. But because you're 60 years old doesn't mean you know everything. And I hope that when I'm 60, I don't feel that way about myself. But generations in the past, we were run during the years, I would say, during the years when we were being run by the greatest generation, which is an expansion of people from during the World War One era. And I think there's a 20-year span, like going into from World War One, maybe going into uh, the early Depression days, something like that. Um, the greatest generation served in World War Two and in Korea. And they had to survive some big drafts. Now, boomers were raised up during the Vietnam War. And so some of them might have become Vietnam War vets, bless their hearts. But the greatest generation, though, came through Second World War and the Korean War. But it seems to me when I look back in that history, in that historic period, the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. Those were 4 decades. 4 decades there that saw a lot of bipartisanship, especially in the 50s. Bipartisanship was very strong in those days. And one of the reasons is back then when people voted for a congressman or a senator or president, they didn't quite vote for the party as much as they voted for the man. There were strong Democratic places though, like the South was a stalwart, just strong Democratic, very strong Democratic, um, you know, heart, hub basically. Just it was, a blue wall basically, to some degree, really. And then you had the Northeast. The Northeast was very Republican in many ways. Like Vermont, for example, was a reliably Republican state, while Alabama and Arkansas were reliably Democratic states, which is funny because today that's completely flipped. It's backwards now. But there were way more swing states and swing districts and things like that back then because people just weren't out as hardened. There was some, strong Democratic and Republican, strong partisan districts and states, but not nearly as many. Um, and going into the 80s, then once the 80s, by the time the 70s and 80s rolled around, nearly every state in the union was up for grabs. I mean, Reagan won like 49 states for reelection in 84, and I believe the only state that he didn't win was Minnesota, maybe. I think that because that's where um, where Walter Mondale, I believe that's his name, or that's where Mondale was Minnesota, and so back in those days, you had California that was Republican. Now, Minnesota has still remained fairly reliably Democratic. It's gotten way more competitive over the past few years, but it's still, Republicans still not won it at the presidential level yet. Trump came close within a point and a half of winning it in 2016, but come 2020, it went completely the opposite direction. He lost it by more than 7 points, and that's a pretty comfortable margin for for Biden to win by. Really, not nearly like the 20 to 30 point margins as yesteryear, but it's still better than what it was in 16. But back then, though, people were not as hardcore partisans. They were more open minded. They listened to one another better. They were not as geographically divided. Now it's an urban rural split for parties. And then where your elections are mostly won and lost are in the suburbs. Now that's a phenomenon that's going on around all sorts of democratic countries like Canada. The conservatives and liberal parties, which are the two mostly governing parties of Canada, fight out their battles in the suburbs of Canada. Suburbs of Toronto, the suburbs of Calgary, Alberta, the suburbs of Vancouver, British Columbia, maybe Montreal, Quebec. Now, that being said, there are more left leaning rural areas in Canada. There are places of Canada, like throughout the Atlantic provinces, that are overwhelmingly liberal, actually, or maybe in favor of the New Democratic Party, which is a third party of Canada that has a lot of sway right now. The same thing can be said in Australia. They win and lose elections in suburbs. In Britain, the Labour Party still has a lot of hold in rural England, for example. Um, but the Conservative Party has gained more clout over the recent past in rural England, whereas in suburban England, where they used to hold their strongest clout at. Now it's under Boris Johnson, the suburbs of London, for example, where a lot of elections are won and lost, are actually becoming way more competitive for the Labour Party to win. And plus, they've got a third party called the Liberal Democrats, which actually are not like the Liberal Democrats here. They're actually more moderate. They're more of like a Kirsten Sinema type, a little less conservative than Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin's actually a conservative Democrat. They're kind of a lot like Susan Collins, a Susan Collins Republican, or a Kirsten Sinema Democrat. Very down the middle. I don't know why they're called Liberal Democrats, but that's the name they've got. And they are very competitive. Like they win a lot of the suburban seats where people are fiscally conservative, they believe in smaller government, but yet they're socially more liberal. Um, so I said all that to say this. Basically, just really, I'm just giving you a little bit of education on how politics has been working around many democratic countries. And by doing that, I kind of explained how things are in English speaking democratic countries, where English is their main language, I guess. But it used to not be that way in America. If you live in rural America, unless it's a majority minority area like the Mississippi River Delta of Mississippi, of Mississippi is where it's majority black. Now it's overwhelmingly Democratic. Memphis here in Tennessee is overwhelmingly Democratic, which it's also an urban area as well. I forget that, but it's a majority minority. Um, but take, let's see, there are some areas in Colorado that are rural that are actually progressive. Vermont's very rural and progressive, but like say Colorado though, step across the border into Wyoming, it's way rural, but it's like 70 points Republican. Montana is very rural and Republican. Idaho is. Um, take a look at Florida, where it gets more. Well, Florida has some, like Miami Dade County is very urban, but it's a little more competitive for both parties, actually, to be fair to them. But in northern Florida, where it's more rural, it's very Republican. In southern Florida, where it's more diverse, it's a little more left leaning. Uh, let's take Michigan or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. In their big urban cities, it is cobalt blue. And then you go into the suburbs, once again, there's more. Uh, this is where the margins, of victory are made up. It's more the swing areas. Then you go out into the, like, say, Pennsylvania. They say in between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, it's like Alabama. But in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, it's like New York City. It's very liberal. It's very forward thinking and stuff. It used to not be that way. And what I wish for people would do, pardon my cough, I've been sick. What I wish people would do instead of judging each other, it gives me heartburn because I live in a conservative area and I got many conservative friends, and it bothers me so bad when I hear conservatives just bashing liberals. It bothers me because liberals ain't wrong in everything. And then when I find liberals that just dog conservatives, and I'm going to be honest, I've had a point in time where I was so upset with conservatives based on their blind loyalty to Donald Trump. It infuriated me so bad. I was like, I don't see why they can't see through him. Somebody who goes and talks trash about everybody, he's disloyal himself. He expects loyalty from you, but don't expect him to be loyal to you. He might try to convince you he is, but like take a look at Mo Brooks. I mean, Mo Brooks went all the way with Donald Trump until he proved that he could not win a primary in Alabama. And Trump had endorsed him like well over a year ago, like in April of 2021. Like I was thinking, oh yeah, Mo Brooks is set to sail. He's totally going to win that nomination in Alabama, especially. That's Trump country down there. Well, it didn't happen. So on one hand, I was happy that hey, they didn't really care what Trump thought. They kind of cared about what they thought. That was nice to see. But then Trump disendorsed him about a year into it. We saw that Mo Brooks was not doing very good. Now, Mo Brooks is not a good candidate at all, in my opinion. If he won the nomination, he still would have won the Senate seat. I don't think he's very good. I don't like him as a person. I think he's dishonest. um, he's somebody who's more caught up in winning elections and less about legislating. I don't feel like I can take it very seriously because there are serious issues that Alabama has, like education and healthcare. Their economy is not as high up as their neighbors in Georgia, and yet he wants to focus on culture war issues that just divide people. Now, I'm not saying that everything in the culture war is bad and incorrect, but that's what he just chooses to focus on. Well, when Trump disendorsed him, I think he got a full view of just how Donald Trump really was. Trump's not going to stick it all the way to the end with you. He wanted you to do it for him, like during the January 6th ordeal. Mo Brooks went all the way to the end for him. But when Mo Brooks proved that he really wasn't that good of a candidate, Trump suddenly just left him high and dry. Trump has the right to do so. He has the right to support whoever he wants to. He has the right to disendorse, which he did. But that doesn't make him right for all the loyalty he expected from Mo Brooks. And that's just one. It's a really good example. Um, and people don't see that, and it's always infuriated me. Anytime they heard criticism of Donald Trump, boom, they shut down. And to be clear, some people that criticized Donald Trump were total hacks. There are people like Rashida Tlaib I did not like when she said, "We're going to impeach the mother effer." That didn't sit well with me. That's not right. You don't run for Congress on a platform of impeaching a president. I'm sure some Republicans did Barack Obama, and some may try to do it to Joe Biden. It's not right. Now, I don't think she ran. I don't remember or not. I didn't follow her that well to know for sure if she actually ran on a platform of impeaching him, but that definitely was something that she wanted to do, and she did twice. Um, I think personally, I think both times he deserved it because I had never seen someone that actually blatantly just ran over laws like he did. But people couldn't see that. And that's not saying that Obama's government didn't do it either, because his Justice Department did things that really put me on edge. Spying on reporters and citizens. I don't think he was personally involved with that. It was just something in the bureaucracy that had been going on for years. But I don't know what he did to stop it. So I think that's legitimate criticism, and plus some other things you can criticize him on. Um, but Obama respected institutions and did respect laws, even though might have not been perfect laws. Trump acted like laws weren't for him. And so anytime they hear criticism of Trump, they just shut down. They just they get mad. They get upset. I mean, you can criticize Biden all day long, and I might get tired of hearing it because after a while it gets to sound like you're whining. But there's plenty to criticize him on. And Joe Biden's big enough to take it. If he doesn't like being criticized, he shouldn't have run for president. But Biden supporters are not enamored with him. People who voted for him are not just all up in arms trying to defend him for everything. I mean, if you look at the Democrats right now, they're throwing him under the bus left and right, especially if they're in a competitive state or district. They're like, yeah, he kind of has messed up. Yeah, he kind of hasn't always shown leadership on some things. Like there's some policies that some Democrats wanted to get through, and he tried to straddle the fence between Joe Manchin, who's more conservative, and AOC, who's on the left. He tried to straddle the fence between those two, and all he got was splinters, and which they did get a good bill out of it. I mean, the infrastructure bill that we've got, I thought we've needed for years. Trump promised to pass an actually bigger bill than what that one is. He promised two trillion, and Biden's bill ended up being like 1.3. Not as big as Trump's bill, but I'll take it. I would have preferred Trump's bill personally. But what's funny is the Republicans, mysteriously, when Trump was out of office, suddenly they found their conservative roots again and said, we can't spend so much money. Now, Joe Manchin, bless his heart, actually seemed to hold true through the whole time. I think he's a bit overly. Um, but anyway, but I just ask for people to just listen to one another. Some things that have helped me to not be so partisan and to not be so divisive is you have to learn to listen. If you are a liberal or progressive, find you some conservative friends to get to know. And I'm going to tell you, they might not change your mind on things 100%, but they will change your mind on some things. Because you might have a PhD from Harvard or, you know, are the biggest nerd and policy wonk that ever walked the planet, doesn't mean you know everything. And if nothing, maybe let's say you're right on some policies. Let's say you have a really good policy on healthcare. If you don't know how to share your policy ideas with other people who think differently than you, then that's something you need to learn. And talking to conservatives might be a way of figuring that out. They're not conservatives. I'm going to be honest, can sometimes be blockheaded. Sometimes they can be a bit dense and dumb when they get all stuck with their conservative ideology on following the Republican Party. And they'll follow the Republican Party off the cliff sometimes. It's what they nearly did with Trump. And I know that's hard to hear, but many of them have. But then for those of you who are conservatives, um, liberals aren't always evil. They're not always trying to tear the country down. And sometimes liberals have some good policies and good ideas that really aren't even that partisan. The Green New Deal is being pushed by the far left, but if we really knew what was in the Green New Deal, we might actually want that. D- does that mean everything in the Green New Deal would have to be passed? No, there might be things in there that are kind of stupid. And I made a comment that sometimes conservatives can be dumb. Well, sometimes liberals can be. I mean, they just can't. They get all stuck in, oh, we need this and we need that, and kind of overload it. And there's where we would need good faith conservatives to say, hold on just a minute, are we sure we need that? And kind of go through and make sure that we're not spending money on things that are stupid. But liberals and conservatives don't do that anymore. Conservatives listen to Fox News and Newsmax, and then people who I like to call couch commentators. And by the way, I got this idea of talking on my laptop through watching what the people that I like to call couch commentators sit down on their couch with an iPhone or video camera and give their opinion of the news of the day. Some of them don't know, many of them really don't know what they're talking about. But anyway, they're entitled to it, to their right to do it. So that's now what I'm doing. I'm like, well, if they can be heard, so can I. But my deal is instead of pushing a hardcore ideology, I want to push for respect, pragmatism, listening. If you are a conservative, especially because I live in conservative America, I want to push conservatives. Please, please listen to a mainstream media organization, at least one. Pick one. My favorites are the BBC. That's a top one. They're high on impartiality. They're high on accuracy and fairness. Another one is the Associated Press, which is print instead of broadcast, but they have the same standards as the BBC. I know conservatives hate NPR because it's so-called tax-funded propaganda. They're not. They do receive some tax funding, yes. They're a public media organization, but they receive a lot of funding from private sources and average people like me. I do recommend NPR that they have standards, they have ethics, or do what I do. I would recommend people listen to either NPR's morning podcast called Up First. It's 15 minutes. They do 3 stories. Just it doesn't have to be a bunch. Just listen to a few stories a day, every day, or listen to Start Here by ABC. That's a good one. They're not partisan. It's not as partisan as what the Republican Party would have you think. And then pull out some progressive, some more progressive people that you might want to listen to, like David Pakman. He's a respectful progressive. You could listen to Sam Seder. Now he's a bit more condescending, and sometimes he's funny to me because he'll be talking about something that conservatives do that is so dumb, and I wish I could hold up a mirror to him and make him see, hey, this is what you're doing. You can't, but he does get a bit condescending. Now you learn some things from him, but you might get a little irritated with him because he's not always polite. The Young Turks, they're not always polite either, but it is what it is. But like Kyle Kalinske, though, he's somebody who has got, is fairly respectful. David Pakman, they're a couple. If you're a liberal, read the Wall Street Journal. That's a legitimate news organization. They got standards and ethics. Anyways, I've been going on for nearly 30 minutes. I hate to cut off abruptly. Maybe I can come on a little later and talk some more. But as of right now, I'm going to shut it down. Some folks are coming home, and I don't want to look, crazy talking on a laptop. But anyway, I'll talk to you later. Love y'all.